Welcome to Legacy Builders, strategies for building successful family enterprises. Brought to you by Beacon Family Office at CI Asante Wealth Management Limited. I'm your host, Corey Gagnon, Senior Wealth Advisor, and on this show, we explore global ideas, concepts, and models that help family enterprises better navigate the complexities of family wealth. Today, we welcome Jennifer East, founder of ONIDA Family Advisors. For nearly 20 years, Jennifer has helped global enterprising families navigate the complexities of wealth, business, and values in transition. Drawing from her experience living and working across North America, Europe, and the Middle East, she brings a cross cultural perspective to enhancing family governance, collaboration, and leadership development. Jennifer is a fellow of the Family Firm Institute, an educator in global family wealth programs, and an advocate for empowering women, rising gen leaders, and sibling teams to thrive. Her work is shaped by the evolving 3.0 approach, centering strengths, relationships, and long term impact. My goal is to be the most curious person in today's conversation with Jennifer, where we explore what happens when individual identity and family legacy quietly collide, and why it's so common for next gen leaders to inherit expectations before they've defined their own path. Jennifer shares how intentional mentorship, emotionally aware leadership, and thoughtful facilitation can shift that dynamic. Together, we consider how families can move from unspoken assumptions to shared clarity, and why making space for reflection may be the most powerful choices they make. Now, let's dive in. Welcome, Jennifer. We're excited to have you here today to share your wealth of knowledge and experiences with us. Let's dive in, shall we? Jennifer, imagine you're delivering the commencement speech to the graduating class of 2026, and you have the chance to inspire them with your story. How would you begin your speech to convey the incredible lessons and expertise that you've gained along your career?
That's a really powerful question. What I'd like to do is share a few vignettes starting from childhood. And actually, as I was reflecting on it, I saw some interesting threads throughout them that I hadn't noticed before. So thanks to you for inspiring that observation in me. I picture me as a child visiting a family member on the west coast of Canada. I was sort of a preteen, and I was at a large public swimming pool standing at the lineup where children would line up to go on a lovely slide and have a lot of fun. And as each child came along, I would let them step in front of me. And so I did this for a while. And all of a sudden, it occurred to me, why am I letting every child in front of me? And why is it that I don't feel that I can have my proper turns in line? And upon reflection, what I've realized is this story spoke to me and speaks to me throughout my life about my family's culture and the business that we were in. We were in the hospitality business. And so putting others first became a part of what we call in our family hold back. This vignette was a starting point to the next one, which relates to frequent conversations that I had with the guests in our hospitality business, where I would be told, well, obviously, this is as a young child as well. Obviously, you'll take over this business someday. And so that thought was planted into my head. Then, as I became a young adult and was working actively in my family business, and I was struggling, as so often is the case between generations, and I decided that my father and I needed some help. So I went to speak to his lawyer, I went to speak to his accountant, to his banker, and asked if they could assist us in our process of trying to work together, trying to talk about the future, strategic planning, roles and responsibilities, how might those change over time. And I was essentially not rebuffed precisely, but clearly this was a challenging request for these advisors. And I wasn't successful in receiving any assistance. So again, my needs, what was important to me wasn't, didn't appear at the time at least to be valued. So I tell you these stories because when you're thinking about the path of one's life and the choices that you make, and in my case, the choices I've made even as a professional, they are really rooted in these early life experiences of service to others, of being denied one's own self actualization, and how that can be a powerful pull and a powerful pattern that you see in family enterprises.
And Jennifer, as you think of that principle that your family lived by, that family holdback, how did that serve the family as a whole? And what did that drive for an individual and collective beyond the business?
Interesting question, and I think it had a powerful impact. In fact, it's still a family joke today, many years after the enterprise has been sold. And I think it had a positive intention, of course, to be in service. However, how it impacted the family was for individuals and the family collectively to sort of put aside or push off not only our individual goals and desires, but even our collective family vision. What is important for us? Where are we headed? So that was something that I would say ultimately had a negative impact, but I know for me professionally has been a real through line in terms of how I help families achieve and communicate and discover individually and collectively what's important to them. So it served me well, just it took me quite a while to figure out how and what to do with it.
Yeah. And so that principle was something that was very much the family had made a conscious decision to say, this is how we operate. And then there were some unconscious behaviors that came about. Where do you see some of those behaviors or scripts that are inherited and maybe fuel and maybe both sides of the coin, Jennifer, and the positive behavior and where it fuels the individual and maybe some of those things that are holding the individual back because of those scripts.
Well, families often, like mine, make a conscious decision. And it's interesting in families that are family enterprises, the decisions and the philosophies often come and emanate from what's good for the business, what's a good business decision.
Right.
And so that script then becomes unconsciously a part of the family ethos. And I would say that especially when you look at it from a generational perspective, my father was of a generation, he lived through World War II. In fact, he was a World War II bomber pilot. So there was certainly an ethos, and there is of others of his generation of sacrifice, of looking to the other, of not having needs and wants of the self are not even appropriate to be discussing.
Right.
And I would say that this is when you look at the generational divides, some of the divides that exist in society now, even though in some families those generations have passed, that this ethos really can impact the way individuals even feel they have permission to make the kinds of decisions about their future that are necessary in order to live productive individual lives, let alone to be a productive member of a family enterprise.
Right. And through the work that you do and the families you work with, where do you see some of these actions that people aren't giving themselves permission to put their needs up and maybe not in front of others or the collective or the business, but really, voice and value what those needs are.
Interesting observation. And I would say the example I shared about my own circumstance, no one in my family ever said to me, "This is something that you must do. Our legacy depends upon you." This is a very common reality for people who grow up in a family enterprise, especially one that has a long-standing legacy, is this unspoken expectation, unspoken pressure that encourages them to look at, well, how can I develop skills that will make me a good candidate to lead this business? How can I ensure that I stay close to my family and perhaps even interrupt the natural progression of my own life on the personal side, which was certainly a phenomena that I experienced as well. So it's not overt. It's an undercurrent within a family, and there's pride, and there are a lot of very positive emotions that underpin this success, legacy, these are things that family members want to continue and to be a part of.
And going back to your comment of the guests and coming to the family business and that undertone, those comments, I'm just thinking about, that being another external factor and influence. How do you feel that awareness today, if speaking to maybe family council or, these leading individuals who are looking at what are those things that we're saying and what are those things that other people are saying that are influencing the future and vision of the enterprise?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for sure in my case, it wasn't something that my parents were aware of, or if they were, they probably didn't sort of add them up and tally them up to see the impact that it would have on me. And I think that if in the position of a family council or a board of directors, that I think it's about being intentional. So recognizing, depending on the type of business, there may be a public nature, the public interaction between younger family members and stakeholders, be they suppliers, customers, the industry at large, and being quite intentional about how this is communicated to those stakeholders. Also, talking to them about conversations they might be having with the younger generation. And I think it raises the value of mentoring and providing, again, a really structured opportunity for young family members to have mentors, people who are not just the family member who may be learning from in the enterprise, but also external people who can provide a different perspective on exactly as you're saying, the things that they're hearing externally, even the relationship and the learning they're doing with their family members.
Right. And Jennifer, in and we talked about some of the generational differences. I think about parents today and, learning from your story. Some people gravitate to, I want to protect my kids from this. There's these threats, there's these, unknowns, perfectly good intentioned, hopefully, stakeholders that might be having a unintended negative consequence. And so what is it that we can do as parents? And I love the mentoring. I think that that's such a valuable tool for all individuals, whether in family enterprise or not. And so, what is it that you think we can do that we don't just put our kids in a bubble per se?
Yeah, and it's a natural thing for parents, especially for the generation who are parents now. They may have experienced a particular style of parenting sort of thrown into things and a desire to go in the opposite direction. So it's first of all, it's about being self-aware and having conversations with your partner about, how are we parenting? Are there opportunities that we can expose our kids to? I'll use the word risk loosely. It's probably aren't not extreme risks, but creating opportunities for our children to try things out, to stumble, to pick themselves up. But building on the mentoring theme, I think even in a not even related to business, but making sure that your children have other adults in their life, aunts and uncles, friends of yours who they develop strong rapport with, where they can get a different perspective on a circumstance, get a different understanding of how they might look at a situation.
Right.
Because especially if you are bringing your children into your enterprise, they're going to need multiple ways of looking at risk, multiple ways of making decisions. And earlier you can start that, the better.
And some of those inherited or those things that are assumed. I'm thinking about we're going through life and you made the comment of it was kind of just assumed that you would take over the business. What are some of those assumptions that I actually think that actually benefit us as a family because we just say, this is how it's been, this is how it's going to be.
Well, I think there are certainly some positive assumptions that relate to, the values that built the success of the family in the first place. And I think it's sad when you see a family that has some really powerful foundations, but hasn't taken the time to articulate them, to agree upon, what are these values and what has been the purpose and what's the purpose going forward. So it always feels like there's so much opportunity for finding out what are these assumptions and bringing them to light. So I think that's one of the ways that the unspoken assumption can build strength in a family.
Right.
In terms of other types of assumptions, I think there can be also on the flip side a damaging impact. There's the son that's been the chosen one from the beginning. There's the daughter who's an artist and is not taken as seriously around the boardroom table. Those types of assumptions can be deeply damaging, again, from a very young age. And you see patterns in families where people live up to these perceptions in ways that, if it had been discussed and sort of a program of development had been put in place, those assumptions wouldn't have had to drive and determined the outcomes.
Right. Well, you read my mind because that's kind of where where I was hoping we would go. And so thinking about some of those conversations, putting them out on the table. In your family story, Jennifer, you spoke of working with your father and reaching out to those trusted advisors that he'd established. What is it today that you know in the work that you've done and the discovery since that point where you realized that there's so much benefit that maybe those professionals didn't even realize when you were coming to them?
For sure. I mean, I think what I saw, looking back, what I saw in their eyes was fear. Fear that they were being asked to enter an arena that they didn't feel qualified to enter, which is fair enough. But what I think is key for any professional who's supporting a family enterprise is to develop their emotional intelligence skills, yes, but also to recognize if someone came to you with a sore tooth, you would send them to a dentist. Similarly, if someone, I was in my 20s, comes looking for help, then perhaps you know someone who's a facilitator or a therapist, someone who could help facilitate conversation. So having a sort of an open door rather than a closed door in that circumstance. And just to share a bit of a contrast between the advice I got from one of these advisors and the advice I received from a therapist, because it really illustrates the power of different types of conversations within family enterprise. So the banker suggested that when I speak to my father, I eliminate all emotion and be very businesslike and, never cry, because you have to try to keep emotion at bay, because he wants to, if you're trying to have a conversation about business, then that's the important approach. So I did try that, and you can imagine the results. It was not not very effective. And then a number of years later, when working with a therapist, her advice was very much the opposite, which is the most significant relationship. You're a dad. Most formative relationship you are will always have with your children is that they're your children, and to think that emotion can be pushed aside is inaccurate, and that coming across in a sort of aggressive or business-like manner, especially with the dynamic of the type of personality of my father, is just going to be the absolute opposite of what you're trying to achieve. So understanding how to approach different types of conversations, understanding the dynamics. Obviously, this is the breadth and wealth of knowledge in our field, and anyone who's even touching a family in any way needs to brush up their knowledge and, again, be able to make a referral or handle a conversation like that effectively.
And speaking to that younger person who is on maybe at that place where maybe where you were before you approached those professionals. And what is it that you maybe in a mentorship would have benefited hearing from somebody, Jennifer?
Really good question. I would say a number of things. I mean, firstly, a mentor could have helped me look more seriously at my own interests and my own goals and vision, because I, like many next gen in a family enterprise, got swept up in somebody else's legacy, somebody else's dream, trying to solve a problem for which I deep down most likely knew that that wasn't where I wanted to put my energies. So I think holding me to account, holding a young person to account about what are their, and this isn't about indulging, this is about holding them, to making them accountable to deciding and determining their own future. So that would be one. Secondly, enabling me to have some perspective, to sort of offer my father some grace. So if you're dealing with a powerful personality, which I was, it's hard. It's almost like you can't see clearly. So perhaps some perspective. Well, this is likely, what has caused your father to have these strong views and to have this perspective. So I think those are two things in that challenging situation that could be helpful to a next gen.
Amazing. I love that. And so thinking about areas where maybe these internal conflicts come about. I really like that comment of living out somebody else's legacy. And so when we see people who've just stepped up, and I love that there's so many different ways that family members can step up in the family business, except they haven't taken that time to reflect of their own needs, their own vision versus the collective vision. How can we develop that within our systems to say we pay attention to the collective vision and we give space for the individual?
Good question. I mean, first of all, you have to be intentional and take the time and energy to develop any of those things, to develop a collective vision, have a conversation. Because, of course, around the kitchen table when a business was started, that's where the vision, although it might not have been called that at the time, that's where the vision was set. And what we tend to do is apply that same governance model to, even when a family has young adult children and they're involved in the business. So being intentional about developing a collective vision is part of it. And in terms of the individual, I think this is one of the great opportunities that family enterprises can offer the next generation, regardless of whether they will work in the business, even become owners or not, is to help them develop a process and with some external support to do some self discovery. So this involves understanding, what are my strengths, what are my gaps, what are my passions and interests, and what do I feel strongly about? And what kind of development plan can I put in place to try to close some of those gaps between my strengths and the areas where I really need to improve my skills? Maybe it's my knowledge, and have some accountability structure. Again, that can come from an external person like a coach or mentor to take the younger generation through a process while reflecting back, though, also to the collective vision. It's not about all the individuals going off and doing their own thing. It's about how do you blend those two, and also that helps define, what are the roles within the ecosystem of the enterprise where I might play a role. So it's all about, frankly, rolling up your sleeve and doing some intentional work as a family. These things don't happen on their own.
Right. And Jennifer, thinking about ready, willing, and able, how do you know that the collective's ready to take those steps?
Um, I'm not sure that I, as an outside advisor, know. I would say my role is to help the family answer that question for themselves. So that's my first response. So obviously, I have lots of experience over a couple of decades, and examples and best practices. But each family is going to navigate that differently. So it's about helping the family, sort of helping them create a framework within which they can have conversations and come to the realization that yes, we're ready to take this on, or no, we're still quite occupied in other projects and we're going to put that off to a later time. So I think it's this concept of facilitating, not answering, not advising, but facilitating the family's process to come to their best answer wherever they are.
Awesome. And in that, where have you seen, or what are the markers that tend to come up that families have identified? This is the time we're ready for this. What can some of those be?
Well, on the sort of one side, unfortunate circumstances where some type of event has occurred, a
Right.
health event or a circumstance where there's a necessity and a sense of urgency. That's not, of course, the best context, but that is, human nature. Sometimes we need a bit of a push to get moving. So that is certainly a reality for many families. And young leaders in those circumstances find themselves having to rise to the occasion very quickly and under enormous pressure. So other markers are when the younger generation is, agitating or voicing their view that, we really want to get involved. And it is a bit like a dance. So often the younger generation says, we want to get involved, but we don't understand the process. We don't understand the timing. And we can't get any answers from you, the leading generation. So that can often be a really strong pull. And another marker is that in wonderful situations where the leader, whether it's the business founder, the matriarch, the patriarch, is self aware enough to recognize that this is something that I need to lead. I've led the organization and now I need to lead. And I would say those situations are less common than the other circumstances, but they often produce the greatest results when you have not only buy in from the leader, but a real push coming from that individual.
Right. And that willingness of parties. If we're sitting here listening, there's somebody who's saying, oh man, I really wish that somebody in my family who's really resisting these conversations. What are some of the things that maybe they could do ahead of coming to an advisor who can help, or coming to a facilitator, or having somebody who can take them through this process? What might they be able to do on their own when they're meeting that resistance?
Well, for sure, always have to remember that we only have dominion over our own decisions. So, certainly a mistake I made was to put all my emphasis on trying to change my father, which, is a very common dynamic in families. So, to answer your question about the individual who perhaps wants to be an advocate for a process like this, that they need to do their own work. So, understand, what's most important to me? What can I bring to this? Where do I see as the obstacles? Who are some of the sort of fellow advocates I can enlist to assist in moving this forward? So that's work that can be done. The other reality is that sometimes a process has to begin even without all of the parties present or even enthusiastic. And this does happen sometimes with the leader, the leading generation, where they go along with it, but they're not really sold on the idea. But it's the momentum that can really help demonstrate, yes, this younger generation really is committed and passionate and has some new ideas and is competent. That momentum can help bring someone along who might be resistant. Because, of course, there are many different reasons for resistance, and sort of having some compassion for that and thinking about, what might this be about? Because there might be a number of factors. So, all of those things are useful starting points.
Yeah. I appreciate the comment of that, trying to change your father. And so often that energy is focused on changing others. And my goodness, it's a difficult place to be. And so, Jennifer, thinking about those champions, maybe they're external champions like those trusted advisors. What are some good examples where you've seen those trusted advisors really come to support and champion the need for some of this governance work to be done?
Well, for sure, people in that position are well placed to support those who have potential. And by potential, I mean the potential to really participate in this type of process, lead this type of process. So they may not be the business leader, they may not even be a prospective leader, but they're to sort of help identify these are some folks in your family that you might not have thought of as in terms of succession, but they have an opportunity and the ability to really lead something. So that's a valuable role that they can play. And I would say probably the most effective is someone who has the ear and the trust of the leader, the ultimate decision maker, if it's still an individual, is to really invest time and energy with that person in helping them define what's important. Because person in that position naturally is going to want to postpone a decision or postpone any process because that involves change and perhaps it would disrupt their position within the family. So it's about really having an empathetic starting point with that person who may be the one resisting, and invest time and energy and genuine care in, not just asking questions, but, gently holding them accountable to not just sort of push it off or try to blame the other generation, to really get them to answer some key questions.
And I'm curious on today when you set that environment for families for success. Going back to the banker and the therapist, what do families do or what do you suggest to ensure they bring themselves and are present and able to have those conversations and connect with their loved ones in the appropriate manner?
What do I suggest that they do?
Yeah, I'm thinking more of that mindset of leave the emotions at the door or, the other end.
Yeah, and in the other end, and I can understand where the intention is, because sometimes there is so much emotion in the room and that it's difficult to have a productive conversation about anything.
Right.
So, for sure, a first step in this process in terms of getting to the right mindset is that don't assume that you're going to leap from we've signed up to start a process to having productive family meetings. So there may be work that needs to be done by individuals or by smaller groups, like, two siblings working together to sort of work through some of the big emotions. And that process, of course, doesn't happen overnight. So having patience with the individual and collective sort of emotional work that sometimes needs to be done, that's an important part of it. And I would say also that being open to the possibility, and I always like to think of it as there are multiple paths down which this family may walk. And yes, perhaps there's one that we see as most ideal if we're a third generation enterprise and we want to pass it on to the fourth and fifth, but if everyone is absolutely tied to that as the outcome, that makes it very difficult to have the type of mindset that you need to embrace the possibilities that there could be, two, three, or four other possibilities. And so I think one piece of wonderful advice I received a long time ago from a coach instructor is hold it lightly. So even if it's really important, if we're gripping tightly to it, it's going to be very difficult to have the kind of make the kind of progress in this process that we could if we could do our own work to come to a place of being a lighter in our approach.
I love that. I think of all of those assumptions, biases, things that people take as non-negotiables that need to be readdressed and recommitted to, and really bringing that up to say, does this still serve us? And, probably happen when that decision to sell your family business of, is this still what we want to do? Or, is it serving our family in the way that we thought it would?
Absolutely. Yes, you have to revisit any of these important questions, not every year, but this is not a it's like doing your will. You don't do it once and then 5, 10, 15 years later expect that it's going to be relevant to the circumstances that you're now living in.
Absolutely. Yes. Jennifer, as we're nearing the end of our conversation today, there are a few questions I ask each guest before we wrap up. You ready for the tough ones?
I'm ready for the tough ones.
All right. What is one key strategy that you believe is most essential for building a successful family enterprise?
Well, I guess I'd reinforce some of the things that we've talked about already. And that is that if you get into the habit as a family of having open, regular, or, to some degree, structured family conversations, family meetings, and I mean from a very young age, when your children are very young, if that becomes just part of the fabric of who you are as a family, then when you come to the more challenging moments of transition or dealing with crises or disagreements, you've already built that muscle of having that type of conversation. Whereas learning it upon the death of a family member, learning how to have those conversations is not nearly as successful. So the habit of regular, structured, and in some cases with the assistance of an outside third party to help you have those conversations.
Fantastic. And what is the most common challenge that you see family enterprises encountering when it comes to wealth transition and generational continuity?
I think again it relates to the first question, and that's sort of assumptions and long-standing relationship struggles that people hold on to. It's inherent in family life that we're going to have differences and history together, and it becomes more complex when we are tied together in economic terms, whether it be wealth or enterprise, and that finding a way to work through those, it's sort of the lubricant to make all the wheels of the transition, the technical aspect of the transition. That's what's truly essential.
Fantastic. And in your experience, what are the top three key qualities that successful family enterprise leaders possess?
Qualities, I would say one is sort of the concept of servant leadership, so that this is position as a leader where I'm here to serve the family. So that orientation towards leadership rather than a command and control or what's in it for me perspective. So that's one important piece. Kind of corollary to that is an empathetic, open mind. So again, I remember a family business leader who said to me, if all I had to do was run our business, that I could do that, no problem. But it's managing all of my siblings and my cousins and my aunts and uncles. And so that having the intensity of that is real. And so having an empathetic and open perspective is crucial. And I guess a very simple final one is energetic. This is not for the faint of heart, this type of role, because you do really have these two roles, two hats you're wearing, business leader and to whatever degree leader in the family or, managing the various family stakeholders who are involved in the enterprise in one way or another. And it is something that requires a level of energy, enthusiasm that in order to sustain that role.
That's such a good one. Energy isn't something that I think we've heard somebody say, and I think it's so key to think of just what it takes to continue through. This isn't a we do it today and then it's done sort of thing. It takes a lot to sustain that and passion, enthusiasm, as you said. It
Well, and I think just reflecting further, it's also about that they are energized by it.
yeah,
So it's not just that they bring energy to it, but that they're the kind of person that gets energy back because obviously if you don't, then it's a draining position.
yes,
So that it's sort of a two-way flow of energy.
absolutely. Before we conclude our discussion today, I'd like to highlight where our listeners can engage in more of the conversations that you're having, as well as any resources that might be helpful or relevant to the conversation that we had today.
Sure. What comes to mind first is a book that I read recently called Us by Terry Real. So it's intended as a book for couples. However, it's based upon his founding of the Relational Life Institute. So it's essentially looking at relationships as the center point of our interactions with people we love. And that if we hold the relationship at the center rather than our needs and in their the other person's needs, that's how we're going to build sustainable satisfying relationships. So I strongly recommend the audiobook version. The author himself reads it, so
Great.
it's a great resource. And in terms of where to continue these conversations, do you mean forums for advisors or families, or what types of resources are you wondering about?
I think more for families.
Sure. The Camden Education, you can find them at camdeneducation.com, has a virtual family wealth education program. And that's a nice introduction. They've got 6 modules, so that's a great way to get introduced. They also run through Camden Wealth in person forums. I think they have some new ones in Canada as well this year. So that's a great way to develop a peer network, learn with others, perhaps bring family members with you so that you're all learning together. Those are a couple of great opportunities for families to connect and learn.
Amazing. And where can our listeners find you, Jennifer?
Well, they can find me. I live in Malta, so I'm Canadian, but live in Malta and work with families in different parts of the world. You can find me at onida.ca, so onida.ca. And on LinkedIn, you can also find me. I like to post insights and updates about presentations and other sharing forums and things I'm doing in different parts of the world. So happy to have a conversation along the lines we've had today.
Fantastic. And we'll be sure to post links to all of those resources in the show notes. Jennifer, I wanted to make sure that we covered everything today. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience that we didn't get a chance to touch on?
I guess another thing that I'm very passionate about and involved in, and is related to the development of the individual, and that is that my husband and I are co-chair of Class Afloat, which is an experiential education, so a high school year at sea for 16 to 19-year-olds. And a really great example of how stepping out of your comfort zone, really challenging yourself, and being on a level playing field with everyone aboard ship, where everyone has to go on night watch, everyone works in the galley. How those types of experiences, we were talking about, raising children in a bubble versus providing them with opportunities to take risks and to be challenged. So it's something that I am passionate about, not only as a sailor, but also because it really feeds the need that young people have to find their own independence, find their voice, and overcome something that's extraordinary and also challenging. So that's something that I'm very passionate about and relatively new. Not the school has been around for 42 years, but my husband and I are newly involved. So something that's quite exciting.
Fantastic. And we'll be sure to also post the links to Class Afloat because I think such a great thing that's, as you say, been going on for a long time, but also just a great example of developing the individual, whether or not it's at sea or other things that families may look at what they can do to develop that individual through experience, because what a great way to learn.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for taking the time to share your expertise, your experiences, such great stories with us today. I received some great benefit myself, learned from you, and I'm sure our listeners will be grateful for your contribution as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your thoughtful and really insightful questions. And yeah, thank you so much for the chance to chat.
As we wrap up this episode, we invite you to reflect on Jennifer's insights into how quiet family expectations can shape decisions long before we define our own. Her story reminds us that clarity in family enterprise often starts with understanding ourselves. Whether you are part of a family enterprise or work alongside enterprising families, her reflections highlight how mentoring dialogue and thoughtful leadership create space for growth. She reminds us that legacy takes shape in how we listen, relate, and navigate change together. Throughout our conversation, Jennifer offered a thoughtful look at the dynamics that shape legacy from within, how assumptions, identity, and family culture quietly guide decisions. She spoke to the value of self awareness, the power of mentoring relationships, and the role of trusted advisors in helping families pause, reflect, and realign. Her perspective encourages us to think not just about where our family is headed, but how we bring ourselves along in the process. If Jennifer's perspective resonated with you, her firm, ONIDA Family Advisors, works with global families to navigate complexity, strengthen connection, and support intentional legacy. You'll find more about her work and contact details in the show notes. Thank you for joining me, Corey Gagnon, your host of Legacy Builders Podcast. It's a genuine privilege to explore the conversations that shape family wealth, leadership, and legacy alongside you. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, maybe a family member, a colleague, or a friend, feel free to share this episode with them. If you'd like to support the show, leaving a rating and a review really helps more people find these conversations. And if you have a question about anything covered today, or a topic you'd like us to explore in a future episode, I'd love to hear from you. You can email us at beaconfamilyoffice@asante.com. That's beaconfamilyoffice@assante.com. Legacy Builders, Strategies for Building Successful Family Enterprises, is brought to you by Beacon Family Office at CI Asante Wealth Management Limited. If you'd like to explore more of our content, you can visit beaconfamilyoffice.com. And if you're facing a transition or simply want a sounding board to think things through, I invite you to schedule an initial call to learn more about how we support families. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, stay intentional about building your legacy. This program was prepared by Corey Gagnon, Senior Wealth Advisor with Beacon Family Office at CI Asante Wealth Management Limited. This is not an official program of CI Asante Wealth Management Limited, and the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of CI Asante Wealth Management Limited. This podcast is intended for general information only and may not be applicable to all listeners or investors. It is not intended as personal financial, legal, tax, or investment advice. Before acting on any information discussed, please seek professional advice regarding your individual circumstances. To learn more, please visit beaconfamilyoffice.com or send us an email at beaconfamilyoffice@asante.com.